Every great story begins with a whisper from the unknown, a breath from beyond the veil. Why do so many fairy tales begin with the arrival of a strange companion, a talking frog, a sly cat, a little man who knows your name? These tales ripple through time. Behind their whimsy lies a deeper pattern the moment a threshold is crossed and the world begins to change. From Puss in Boots and the Frog Prince to the whispered lore of Cunning folk, we find a recurring motif, fiction echoing a real phenomenon reported in countless spiritual traditions. A being appears, offering aid or knowledge, asking for trust, and drawing the hero into a larger story. The encounter is never random. It marks the opening of a great journey of transformation. This episode explores what it means to be called, not by human voices, but by the quiet yet thunderous knock of the unseen. Welcome to the Hidden Passage. We might imagine that sometime near the dawn of history as we know it, humanity was ignorant of whence it came or its purpose. It wandered the wilderness. Threats pressed from all sides, and the raw struggle of survival was constant. But then, something stirred. A presence was sensed. Something truly other, a herald of a greater reality beyond the ephemeral world. A beacon of hope, a guide through the darkness, and a call to reach beyond perceived limits. From the earliest myths across cultures, supernatural beings arrive at great junctures in the human story, between primitive and civilized life, between the profane and the sacred. These entities seem to always find their way into human consciousness, and were believed not merely to instruct, but to catalyze transformation, shaping the course of human evolution and consciousness itself. This mystery lies at the heart of initiation, which Mircea Eliade defines as, quote, a body of rites and oral teachings whose purpose is to produce a decisive alteration in the religious and social status of the person to be initiated. In philosophical terms, initiation is equivalent to a basic change in existential condition. The novice emerges from his ordeal endowed with a totally different being. He has become another. Like many customs, initiation rites are recapitulations modeled on the direct transpersonal experiences that inspired them, forming the root of a great tree, branching out through all cultures of the world. Every great journey begins with unease. Before a path is revealed, there's often a season of restlessness, a hollow ache, a feeling that something is missing. Eliade notes that prospective shamans show marked behavioral changes. Quote, the candidate becomes meditative, seeks solitude, sleeps a great deal, seems absent-minded, and has prophetic dreams. A person becomes misaligned with the world in which they live. It may feel like the world is changing, when really it is them. This friction begins to bleed into life, which may seem to be falling apart, but this collapse is often the prelude to expansion. a rupture through which light begins to pour. What we perceive as random accidents or mishaps may not be mere happenstance. Tracing these same initiatory patterns in myths and folktales, Joseph Campbell notes that these preliminary disturbances are, quote, the result of suppressed desires and conflicts. They are ripples on the surface of life produced by unsuspected springs, and these may be deep as the soul itself, and they may amount to the opening of destiny. Esoteric writer Alice Bailey expounds on this connection between the inner and outer life, stating that for the candidate of initiation, quote, wherever he goes, the force which flows through him from the higher planes and his own inner God may produce peculiar effects on his environment. It acts as a stimulator of both good and evil. This often causes the temporary downfall of highly advanced souls. They cannot stand the force pouring into and upon them, and they go to pieces. It is here that the other, the spirit who has chosen a person for some mysterious purpose, finds its opening. Bailey continues that the energy already stirring within the candidate is used by those who work on the other side to bring about certain desired ends. Carlos Castaneda's Yaqui informant Don Juan described these subtle but powerful interactions as part of a definite methodology, which he called the abstract cores, archetypal blueprints for events that signal the potential ally's involvement. In any sorcerer's story, the abstract cores could be found, and only through that tale could their ineffable nature be communicated. Once there was an ordinary man, like any other, he recounts. He was, like everyone else, a conduit for the spirit, and by virtue of that, like everyone else, he was part of the spirit, part of the abstract, but he didn't know it. The world kept him so busy that he had neither the time nor the inclination to examine the matter. The spirit tried uselessly to reveal their connection. Using an inner voice, the spirit disclosed its secrets, but the man was incapable of understanding the revelations. Naturally, he heard the inner voice, but he believed it to be his own feelings and his own thoughts. At first, the intent of the spirit manifests inwardly as a whisper, a voice within, fleeting impressions or symbolic dreams. But if the call goes unanswered, the dialogue spills outward, taking the form of strange coincidences, omens, and unusual events. Psychologist Carl Jung acknowledged the reality of this phenomenon, which he called synchronicity. He described it as, quote, a meaningful coincidence of two or more events where something other than probability of chance is involved. Such moments feel as though an invisible hand is arranging the pieces, creating a thread of meaning just for us. Jung guessed that it had something to do with the connection between the personal and collective unconscious, but the mystery of how it worked, its mechanism of action, of course, eluded him. Nonetheless, he maintained that, quote, synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. Omens often arrive when least expected. In many ancient cultures, even small events were seen as messages from the spirit world. The ancient Romans formalized this into the practice of augury, interpreting the flight patterns of birds or the entrails of animals as an indicator of divine will. Though modern minds might dismiss such practices, they hint at a universal truth. Initiation begins with attention, with learning to listen. When a series of unlikely events begins to cluster around our lives, it's as if the universe itself is arranging the stage for our transformation. Apparently, the merest of chance, writes Campbell, reveals an unsuspected world, and the individual is drawn into relationship with forces that are not rightly understood. These subtle manipulations are doorways in disguise.
I don't know whether I like it very much being seen around with an angel without any wings.
Oh, I've got to earn them. And you'll help me, won't you?
Sure. How?
By letting me help you.
At length, the hidden benefactor reveals itself. Its arrival, seemingly out of the blue, may ignite a crisis of mind and body, of fear and trembling in the twilight between worlds. Russian anthropologist Sergei Shirokogorov observed that nearly every shamanic vocation begins with a hysteric or convulsive episode, which is sometimes triggered by the appearance of the spirit itself. The mere existence of such a being may suddenly undermine all assumptions about the nature of reality. For modern minds, it is a living contradiction, something that should not exist in our framework. But beyond philosophical implications, as Don Juan maintained, the presence of an ally has the power to forcibly shift our center of perception, which he called the assemblage point. The effect of this can radically alter our immediate experience of reality and the self. One may feel as though they're becoming something totally other, and the world appears to rearrange into something alien. Any movement of the assemblage point is like dying, he explains. Everything in us gets disconnected, then reconnected to a source of much greater power. That amplification of energy is felt as a killing anxiety. Anthropologist Ronald Olson notes of the Quinault Indians, quote, "The first vision of the spirit itself was terrifying in nature, and the faint-hearted usually ran away." Similarly, when Cornish cunning woman Anne Jeffreys witnessed, quote, "3 persons of small stature, all clothed in green, leap over the garden wall, she was so frightened that she, quote, fell into a kind of convulsion fit." Perthshire cunning woman Janet Trall recalled that the fairies, quote, "drave me down, and then I was beside myself and would have eaten the very earth beside me." While they may seem monumental, as Iliade notes, these experiences, quote, "signify no more than a choice from above to merely prepare the candidate for new revelations." However, they are already being conditioned for something greater. He continues, quote, "Sicknesses, dreams, and ecstasies in themselves constitute an initiation. That is, they transform the profane, pre-choice individual into a technician of the sacred. In the face of an overwhelming force, the throes of psychological turmoil, the will is tempered. In the midst of darkness, the spirit offers a light. Sometimes it comes when hope feels lost, slipping through the widening cracks of the status quo. Among shamans, spirits often intercede directly through a dream. Gabriel Murr, a Guatemalan shaman, having lost his wife and 5 children in an epidemic, had narrowly escaped death himself, lying ill for several months. Too weak to rise to his feet, he chewed coarse grain and drank the rainwater dripping down from the roof of his dwelling. One night, a small gnome, no more than 4 feet tall, dressed in blue, appeared to him. "I come to impose on you," said the gnome. "You have been ill, my son. You have been close to La Gloria."
Ridiculous of you to think of killing yourself for money. $8,000.
Yeah, now just things like that. Now, how do you know that?
The testimonies of the cunning folk and witch trials of early modern Europe reveal a similar pattern. Familiars approach them in a time of misfortune. In 1572, a poor farm wife named Bessie Dunlop, living in rural Scotland, had just such an experience. One foggy morning, while driving cattle to pasture, she came across a gray-bearded man carrying a white wand.
"Holy Mary,"
he said.
"Bessie, why are you making such a great fuss and crying so much over something so worldly?"
She replied,
"Alas, do I not have good reason to grieve? We've lost all our belongings. My husband is on the brink of death. My baby won't survive, and I myself am in a weak and helpless state. Don't I have every reason to feel heavy-hearted?"
"Bessie, you've angered God by asking for something you shouldn't have. So I advise you to make peace with him. I'll tell you this, your child will die, and before you return home, your sick cow and 2 sheep will also die, but your husband will recover and be as healthy and strong as he ever was."
Bessie recalled feeling, quote, somewhat comforted when she was told that her husband would recover. Thereafter, Tom continued to appear to Bessie, and on the 3rd visit, he made a proposal. Across both shamanic and cunning folk traditions, the offer goes something like this. The spirit promises an end to misfortune, but only when the individual agrees to work with helping spirits and take up the role of a magical practitioner. The gift is not in wealth, but in agency, a means of solving their troubles.
Did you ever hear the story of the Fisher King? It begins with the king as a boy, having to spend the night alone in the forest to prove his courage so he can become king. Now, while he's spending the night alone, he's visited by a sacred vision. Out of the fire appears the Holy Grail. So he reached in the fire to take the Grail, and the Grail vanished, leaving him with his hand in the fire to be terribly wounded. Now, as this boy grew older, his wound grew deeper, until one day, life for him lost its reason. He had no faith in any man, not even himself. He couldn't love or feel loved. He was sick with experience. He began to die. One day, a fool wandered into the castle and found the king alone. The fool took a cup from beside his bed, filled it with water, and handed it to the king. And as the king began to drink, he realized his wound was healed. He looked in his hands, and there was the Holy Grail, that which he sought all of his life. He turned to the fool and said with amazement, "How could you find that which my brightest and bravest could not?" The fool replied, "I don't know. I only knew that you were thirsty."
This seemingly ordinary fellow who called himself Tom Reed was, after all, no mortal man, insisted Bessie, but rather the ghost of a soldier who had taken up with the fair folk and become a sort of emissary, sent by none other than the fairy queen herself. Yet his arrival was not accompanied by any phantasmic pomp, but rather disguised as little more than an everyday encounter.
I told you I'm your guardian angel. I know everything about you.
Well, you look about like the kind of an angel I'd get. Sort of a fallen angel, aren't you? What happened to your wings?
The guide is often unremarkable in form. The carrier of destiny may be underestimated, appearing not as a shining angel, but as a humble traveler, easily dismissed by the rational mind, or with swarthy, feral qualities repugnant to more refined, pious sensibilities. For both shamans and cunning folk, spirits frequently appeared as common folk, animals, or some combination thereof, mostly ordinary but with slight peculiarities. Some figures bore features which seemed ominous, echoing more stereotypical depictions of evil. Cloven hooves or shadowy entities like the, quote, mickle black man who presided over the witches' Sabbaths. While often morally ambivalent by Christian standards, they were still revered as genuinely helpful, though sometimes troublesome, allies. As Campbell notes, quote, "The herald is often dark, loathly, or terrifying, judged evil by the world. Yet if one could follow, the way would be opened through the walls of day into the dark where the jewels glow." Wilby writes that, quote, "The assortment of spirits which came under the umbrella term of fairies, bizarre and sometimes ridiculous looking as they were, possessed the numen of sacred beings, and as such were objects of devotion. In Wales, fairies were held in, quote, astonishing reverence, while in England, according to one late 16th century commentator, quote, the opinion of fairies and elves is very old, and yet sticketh very religiously in the minds of some. Despite the reproach and leading questions by inquisitors to secure confessions of consorting with demons, many cunning folk insisted that their familiars were goodly spirits of God. How the candidate responds to the prospective familiar determines the tenor of the events following the initial meeting. When confronted with the unknown, resistance is only natural. Don Juan, continuing the narrative of the abstract cores, relates that the man, quote, refused on the spot, and in no uncertain term, to have anything to do with the spirit. He wasn't going to fall for such preposterous nonsense. He knew better. The result was a total stalemate. This, as well as religious conditioning, often led the cunning folk to initially reject the offer. Wilby notes that Anne Jeffreys, despite her fame as a skilled healer using fairy magic, was, quote, not little troubled when ministers warned her that her familiars were evil spirits. One night, they called to her repeatedly to come and speak with them. Jeffreys explained that, quote, when I came to the fairies, they said to me,
What? Has there been some magistrates and ministers with you, and dissuaded you from coming any more to us, saying we are evil spirits and that it was all the delusion of the devil? Pray desire them to read that place of scripture in the first epistle of St. John, chapter 4, verse 1. Dearly beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirit, whether they are of God.
This page of the scripture was turned down to in a Bible inside her chambers. Bessie Dunlop also rejected Tom Reed under similar suspicion. Once when he appeared to her, she asked,
Are you a Christian?
God forbid I were not.
If you be the devil, you will say you are God's creature.
I was once a man as you are now.
Dunlop then commanded him, in the name of God, to go from her. Despite expressing a profound mistrust of visionary experience, explains Wilby, Christian mystical literature has consistently described how visions of, quote, sacred beings can aid the spiritual aspirant on their mystical journey. Jewish and Christian thought has termed such experiences as, quote, the encounter model of revelation. Experiences in which, according to theologian Keith Ward, quote, a personal spirit is encountered in an experience of peculiar urgency and intensity, and which provides a sense of experienced unity of great, even unsurpassable worth. A disclosure of transcendent spiritual reality in some way underlying the realm of sense experience. I fled him, down the night, down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. The Hound of Heaven, Francis Thompson. Despite hesitation and even rejection, the spirits seldom give up easily. When the gnome pointed toward a person he was meant to heal, Gabriel refused, claiming he neither could nor would heal anyone. Yet the shining gnome returned every night for a week straight, teaching him the methods of healing until he finally accepted his path. The spirit's pursuit can become relentless and harsh. Sometimes illnesses and misfortune are blamed on them, framed as a kind of punishment for refusal. One Siberian Yakut shaman recalled, quote, "I became ill when I was 21 years old and began to see things with my eyes and hear with my ears things that others could neither see nor hear. For 9 years I fought against them, without telling anyone, because I feared they might not believe me. In the end, I became so ill that I was close to death, so I began to shamanize, and very soon my health improved." Don Juan marks this as the third abstract core, the trickery of the spirit. After the spirit had manifested itself and gotten no response, it laid a trap for the man. It was the final subterfuge, not because the man was special, but because of the incomprehensible chain of events of the spirit that made the man available at the very moment it knocked on the door. The directives of the ally are sometimes barely noticeable. In my case, they were commands. I had been shocked. Blood was pouring out of a hole in my chest. As the young Don Juan lay dying on the side of the road, the first person to find him, saving his life, was a sorcerer. He would become his mentor, or nagual. The decisive intervention immediately and dramatically altered the course of his life, placing him on the path of sorcery. Campbell linked these supernatural associates with the archetype of the herald, whose arrival, quote, signifies that destiny has summoned the hero and transferred his spiritual center of gravity from within the pale of his society to a zone unknown. Their mercurial qualities are often accentuated because it is they who are responsible for leading the hero into an inherently dangerous realm, necessary as it may be. Resistance is therefore not just fear of the unknown, but a clinging to the familiar, even if it no longer serves us. Refusal of the summons converts the adventure into its negative, writes Campbell. Walled in boredom, hard work, or culture, the subject loses the power of significant affirmative action and becomes a victim to be saved. The tale of Sleeping Beauty may speak to this. When Briar Rose fell into her adolescent stasis, it wasn't just her, but the entire kingdom that slipped into an unwaking sleep. The townsfolk, the craftsmen at their work, the merchants at their stalls, the horses in the stables, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons on the roof, even the fire on the hearth, went to sleep, and the wind laid itself down. A thorny hedge grew up around the castle until it was entirely sealed and hidden from view. Campbell compares this image to the true self, failing to realize its potential, enclosed by the hedge of habit and fear, cut off from the vitalizing forces of the unconscious. The ego loses all potency and can do nothing but wait until a prince arrives to save it. For our practitioners, their innate clairvoyance, allowing them to see spirits as solid as physical humans, almost demands karmically that they use it, a power with the potential to heal and transform whole communities, as we will later see. To avoid it squanders a rare gift. For those who have answered the call, the next stage of initiatory contact often involves a journey into non-ordinary reality, a liminal realm that operates by its own set of laws. In accounts of the Cunning folk, this journey frequently takes the form of a visit to the fairy realm, a place of both revelry and revelation. Argyllshire witch John Reed recounted that he and the, quote, hags were summoned to the Sabbath by a black dog with a chain around its neck, the tinkling of which they followed. In another account, Cunning man Donald McMichael, while traveling a country road, quote, at a hill he saw a light, not knowing where he was. Inside the hill, he found a great number of men and women, with many candles lit. He saw an old man who appeared to hold authority over the rest, and saw them all dancing around the lights. Around the same time, the ferry boy of Leith gave a similar testimony to Captain George Burton, who asked him, "Who was there with you in the ferry hill?" The boy replied, "There are, sir, a great number of men and women, and they are entertained with many kinds of music in addition to my drum. They also have a great variety of food and wine." Burton then asked, "How did they get under the hill?" The boy answered, "There are a great pair of gates that open for them, although they are invisible to others. Inside, there are grand, spacious rooms, as well furnished as any in Scotland." The activities in these otherworldly spaces often center around feasting, music, and dance. Scholars have sometimes dismissed these experiences as lacking the mystical depth of the illustrious traditions of the literati, but a closer inspection reveals both deeper substance and less distinction than what has been assumed. In Christian visionary accounts, ecstatic revelry is also a recurring theme. 14th century German contemplative Christina Ebner saw that Christ was preparing a special celebration and was inviting all his saints to it. She beheld a dance in heaven, in which God and Mary took part, along with the saints, and that, quote, whenever the Lord raised his foot, he emitted a great flame. The purpose of these ecstatic states is not simply to amuse. Music and dance in many mystical traditions is a tool for spiritual communion. The beat of the drum or the hum of a chant, fluid, repetitive motion of body, invokes the rhythms of the cosmos, that which underlies and orders all things. Through alignment, the mind loosens its grip on the rational, making space for direct experience of the sacred. The fairy dancing, then, could be understood as a method for achieving this altered state, a reminder that transcendence is not always a solemn, ascetic affair. The Inuits' most powerful shamans are said to, quote, often go up on a visit to the people of day just for pleasure, and that there is a great rejoicing in the land of day when a wizard comes on a visit. Beneath the glamorous surface of fairyland lies a deeper initiatory mystery. These revels loosen the ego's grip and its attachment to the material world. Practitioners joined the gatherings as a way to cross the threshold, to step outside the limits of perception and connect to a higher mode of being. The insistence on behalf of the spirits to join in merrymaking may not be idle fancy. As Don Juan explains, quote, from the spirit's point of view, the task consisted of clearing our connecting link with it. The edifice that intent flaunts before us is a clearinghouse, within which we find not so much procedures as the silent knowledge that allows the clearing process to take place. Without it, no process could work, and all we would have would be an indefinite sense of needing something. When Bessie Dunlop rejected Tom's invitation to go with him, saying that she could see no practical purpose or reason for it, he retorted that if that was the way she thought, she would get little good from him. But, notes Wilby, many other cunning folk, quote, accepted their familiars' invitations, and their experiences of journeying to the Sabbath or fairyland seem to have been an integral part of their relationship with their spirit allies. The candidate's passage through these experiences is often marked by a shift of consciousness, a sense of returning to something deeply familiar. This reminiscent feeling is present in many mystical traditions. Countless myths speak of a golden age, a time when humanity lived under the guidance of the gods, and the worlds of spirit and matter were not so divided. Esoteric thinkers suggest that these myths recall humanity's evolutionary infancy, a time of natural clairvoyance. But this state did not last. There came a fall. The gods seemed to recede. The world grew silent as man individualized into physical form and began to forget his place in the cosmic order. So what we call initiation is in essence a restoration of this lost condition, a process of remembering. The candidate is not only being handed something new, but awakened to what has already been there. He is administered the draught of remembrance. Bailey writes that at the first initiation, a person is brought face to face with the true self, the eternal intelligence guiding his journey across lifetimes. He knows past all disturbance that this intelligence has been demonstrating its power through his successive incarnations. This theme of return lies at the heart of Jung's psychology as well. The goal of life, he maintained, is not to form the self out of nothing, but to remember what has always been there, waiting beneath the mask of the ego. Perhaps this is why these beings were called familiars, for under the fear and strangeness lies a recognition of something long known. In Jungian terms, the spirit guide is, as Wilby notes, quote, recognizable, intimate in a very human way, and yet simultaneously numinous and other. This dual nature allows it to translate the symbolic contents of the subconscious for the conscious mind and negotiate the split between the two. Whether these are autonomous intelligences or avatars of our own psyches, they nonetheless open the doorway to the hidden self. The hero's journey is not a linear climb, but a spiral, winding back to what was lost, like tracing the weaving patterns of the mandala round and slowly toward its center. And through each winding path, something new is born. The union of the old wisdom with the hard-won awareness of a life lived in time. The path is not simply walked, it is revealed in the act of living. And behind the scenes, the guide clears the way so that the soul can learn to see. Esoteric thinker Rudolf Steiner described initiation as not an artificial construct. The formal initiation rituals are merely symbolic expressions of an inner spiritual process that is part of human evolution itself. It arises organically when the soul matures to a point where higher consciousness becomes both possible and necessary for future growth. These changes, as Jung also observed in his patients, are engendered by life itself and not by some secret rites or oaths. As Steiner states, quote, initiation takes place in the soul and its relation to the world for a majority of people today, and yet they know nothing of it. The difference between the initiate and the non-initiate lies in the perception of processes that are experienced as a matter of course, but unconsciously. Perhaps the strange companions of old stories, the frog, the sly cat, the nameless little man, were always waiting for us. And in this age of uncertainty, where so many of us struggle to find meaning, it seems that now, more than ever, we are being asked to remember. The entire truth, explains Don Juan, is that the spirit reveals itself to everyone with the same intensity and consistency, but only sorcerers are attuned to such revelations. We may resist or hide and prevaricate, Yet the call of the guide continues to ring through the hollow of the heart, just as the yearning of the soul itself. When we finally turn to face it, we discover that what we feared was never alien at all, but the truest part of ourselves. In Part 2, we will follow this path deeper into the transformative fire of supernatural aid, dismemberment, and rebirth, and pass through the great threshold beyond which the soul finally awakens in its fullness.
Remember your vow as to gods. How long have I waited?